Hi friends, when I see my students coming out of the history class giggling and dancing, I ask them what was special about the day. They tell me, ma'am, we learned about Krishna Deva Raya. It was such a great thing. And this is how every day I keep asking them. And then the same students, when they come out after their history exam, I ask them, how was the exam then? Ma'am, it was so difficult. We couldn't remember the dates. We couldn't remember the events. Couldn't do well. This is because, dear students, you take history very objectively. You need to have a subjective approach also towards history. Well, history is a great saga of man's evolution, his struggles, his growth, his progress, his achievements, and also his downfall. And at the same time, history is the sad tale of his cruelty, his tyranny, his despotism. And we all know that we have learned much from history. History has given us great lessons. We know that the mistakes that we committed in the past must not be committed in the present and the future. But then, man, his ambitions, well, aiming is not bad. Ambition is a very good thing. But then over-ambition is very dangerous. You know that you need to prosper, but not at the cost of the people. You have to have an individuality on your own. This is what the history has been teaching us. Well, let us take an example. Who was Alexander? Disciple of Aristotle. So Aristotle was the guru of Alexander the Great. Who doesn't know his name? There is a controversy about Aristotle's tutoring to Alexander. That's a different thing. Let's keep it off. But what exactly did Aristotle teach Alexander? He taught him, be scientific in approach, explore the world, and don't spare barbarism, overtake it. Use all the parts of your brain and then have the whole world in your arms. Was this wrong that a teacher should tell this? But how a student takes his tutor and his words matters most. Aristotle dreamt something, Alexander dreamt something different. He wanted to conquer the world at the cost of his dreams. But this is not exactly what his guru had taught him. So what did he do? At the age of 20, that was not the right age for him, but then that ambitious he was. He took more than 30,000 Greek soldiers along with him, then went on conquering one after the other, and when he came to the river Ganges, somehow he found it was too huge a country to overcome, but then he was aiming to conquer it, and it's all destiny. Dear friends, he was hardly 32 and he fell sick, he suffered malaria, and then he passed away. So was that the right age for a person like Alexander to die? So these are the questions that we find in history. But then are we talking of Aristotle and Alexander today? No. As students of literature, I want you to go back to the era of Elizabeth I, 16th century. What a queen she was. I don't mean that if there was complete 100% peace during her reign. There were political and religious rebellions on some important aspects, like the Puritans were rising on one hand and there were also Protestants on the other. But she was a wise queen. She maintained the balance. But then when we come to James I, that was not the same. He was ambitious in a different way. He wanted to overtake the parliament and almost to the level of throwing them to dust. James I was of course a great leader, but then his views regarding the parliament were not good. And then what was else happening in the nation during his reign? The English church, the Church of England, was literally following the terms and conditions of the Roman Catholic Church, which the people of England, especially the Puritans, did not want. They wanted the purification of the church. So what happened when Charles I came after James I? He was literally executed. He was beheaded because the role of the Puritans during his age was too rebellious in its nature. The Puritans did not want that the king or any head should intervene between the devotee and the God. They wanted a clear passage between God and between human and the Bible, between human and God. So this was a kind of a religious war during the age of Charles I. Then who came after Charles I? We all know it was Oliver Cromwell. And then there was a kind of a reformation in the field of religion and religious affairs. And more or less the theatres were closed. And you must remember that the literature that was written before the end of 16th century was beautiful pagan and romantic literature where morality was not given such a important place or a significant appeal. So now, with the coming of Oliver Cromwell, with people like John Milton in hand as literary masters, they wanted to highlight moral and religious affairs. This is because they thought somewhere what was happening in the religious and social life of people was also because of the literature that was written during the Romantic period. So they wanted to change the trend. So now John Milton, as you know, was a great literary figure, but that was not all. He was the secretary for foreign tongues under Oliver Cromwell. He had to work from morning till night, late hours, and he had to master various languages like English, Latin, Hebrew, French, Spanish, and so many Greek also. Then it was such a kind of a life for him. Of course, he enjoyed it because he had such a space to create his own literary career there. He had written beautiful poems already. He was expanding his space in the field of religion, and he was a great devotee of God. God was everything for him. You must know that most of his sonnets are Petrarchan in style. And what does a Petrarchan sonnet speak of? It speaks of either love or romance. Then how was that suitable for Milton? Milton wrote about his love for God, his love for Christianity. So he had surrendered so much of himself in literature to God. So what happened here? After this hardship of Milton's service to Oliver Cromwell, at the age of 43, Milton became totally blind. He lost the eyesight of both the eyes. Then came Sonnet 19, which we are going to discuss today. So this Sonnet 19 is also called his On His Blindness. But students, I must tell you, make it clear, this title On His Blindness was not given by Milton, but it was given after decades of Milton's death by one of Milton's lovers. He was a bishop in a church. He read Milton. He also wanted to publish Milton in many other countries. So he changed the title of the poem as Sonnet 19 into On His Blindness. Now when you come to this poem, you know now Milton's love for God and Milton's love for religion and how much he had dedicated to the service of the English Commonwealth. And then day and night he prayed and all his religious affairs were upright. And then why did God take off his eyesight? This is the big question posed in this poem On His Blindness. So what does the title indicate? Let us briefly discuss it critically. Though it is not the title given by him, but then let us have an outlook like that. Who was blind? Was it Milton who was blind, or was it God who was blind to Milton? So students, you have to have a critical approach. With all this service to God, was God so disappointed with Milton that he took away his eyesight? So this is one thematic appeal in the poem. Now the second, as we say, Guru Dakshina. Was it because of the talent that God had given Milton, the art of writing poetry, the art of invoking the muses? So was it Guru Dakshina from Milton? Like we have Dronacharya asking for the thumb of Ekalavya. Had Milton surrendered his eyes to God? So this is also a beautiful kind of a critical approach that we have. Because we have one story in the Bible which says there was a master and he had three disciples. And one fine day he calls them and he says, I'm going to give you something today. So he calls the first disciple and tells him, he gives him 5 coins. And tells, imagine that these are your 5 talents and let me see how you work on that and what contribution would you give to your master. The second is called and he is given 2 coins and tells you have 2 talents, let me see how you return it to the master. And then the third disciple, he gave just 1 coin and told him, let me see what would you do with 1 talent in you. So the 3 disciples go and come back one fine day. So the first fellow who had got 5 coins had multiplied it in a kind of a business, in a kind of using his own art and skills, and he had multiplied the money and he gives the double to the master. The master is happy that whatever knowledge he has given the disciple, he has completely used it. The second person comes, he had not multiplied it to that extent, but at least a little bit of contribution was there from him. But then the third disciple was kind of a shrewd person. What he thought, well, if I tell my master that since you had given me only one talent or one coin, I lost it somewhere, so I couldn't give you back anything. So he came in a very meek manner and told. The master was very angry because he knew that the knowledge that I have given has not even entered his outer layers of the brain. He has become a shrewd person. So he punishes him and he sends him to the jungles to suffer. So now Milton remembers this story somewhere here and thinks that God had given me one talent, one beautiful talent, and using this talent I was serving him, and one fine day God asks me the same as Guru Dakshina to him. What a curse it would be on my part. So this is also one kind of a theme. Now coming to the third theme, this is a very important theme students must know. This is this Milton imagines. So its mind keep on imagining. Even Milton imagines, is this because of the original sin of man some fine day back in the past? So what is this original sin of man? So let us go back to the study of Bible. So let us just take a hint from it. There is a Yahwist account in Christianity which talks about Adam and Eve. There are many accounts that talk of Adam and Eve, but this is most applicable to this poem. So what happened? God was creating so many animals, so many birds. He was creating flora, fauna. So he took almost 6 days for the creation of this beautiful nature. And the 6th day, he thought, let me create something else which would resemble me, whether in beauty or whether in honesty or whether in the shouldering of responsibility, etc. So he created a man. And then the man was so beautifully created that he looked like God. And then God was so happy with this creation, he thought, where do I place this beautiful thing? So for him, he created a Garden of Eden. Garden of Eden was nothing but a kind of a earthly paradise. It was very close to heaven, so he put Adam there in the Garden of Eden. So who was observing all this? Actually, Lucifer, an angel, was the most favorite of God before the creation of Adam. Once Adam was created, God's attention was completely shifted from Lucifer to Adam because it was a new creation and he wanted to look after its workings. But Lucifer took it in another way. He thought that immediately after the creation of Adam, God has ignored me. So till then, Lucifer was the king of all the angels. And you can't imagine how Milton in his Paradise Lost has beautified this beautiful being of God. Now he is so much disappointed with God that he calls a group, a close circle of his, and says, God has literally cheated me and also cheated you. So he could have sent me to the Eden garden. So what was the need to create Adam? Now he becomes a kind of a rebel to God. He wants to wage a war against God because by then his innocence had turned into almost a kind of an ignorance, and his ambition had become over ambition. So he wanted to sit on the hills which was above the seat of God. So this is the dream that he dreamt, and God came to know about this. So one day he called Adam, are you going to take back your words, or are you going to suffer something? So but then Satan, Lucifer was very firm with his ideals. Now God creates one big hole in the earthly paradise and throws them all into it. And where do they go and fall? All the angels along with their master Lucifer go and fall in the hell, which was called as Pandemonium by Milton. So now the beautiful Lucifer gets the name Satan once he falls into the hell. So this is one side. The other side, after the creation of Adam feels lonely in Eden garden. Now God has to create a companion for him. No doubt there was enough flora and fauna there. But then one fine day God made Adam sleep, and then when Adam was sleeping, he took some flesh from his ribs and then he created a woman. So a woman was the creation of a man. She was not an independent creation of God. So she was so beautiful, and Adam was very happy that there was a companion for him who could understand him. But then there was a condition for both Adam and Eve that the Eden garden was a very pious place. It was a kind of a God's place, and there were so many beautiful trees there. And there was one particular tree called the apple tree, which was the tree of knowledge. And God knew why he had created a female for a man, because he knew that the generation had to multiply someday or the other with the intervention of God. So he calls them and tells that you are forbidden to eat that apple because it is the apple of knowledge. So once you eat that, you would commit sin. So please don't go there till I ask you to do that. And then God is relieved of the responsibility of the Eden garden. Time passes. Now Satan has fallen into the pandemonium. Now he plans of a thing. What if he goes to the Eden garden and seduces Eve? Because see, now the scriptures also say, first seduce the woman and the woman naturally seduces the man. So this is how it is portrayed there. Now Satan takes the form of a serpent. He goes to Eden garden and then he's sitting on the tree. He's such a beautiful creature. He has formed himself like that. And Adam has gone out and Eve is sitting near the tree and he calls her, he talks to her and tells, look at me how beautiful I am when I have the favor of eating this fruit, tasting this fruit and lying there on the tree. Would God mind if you taste it a little bit? So somehow he seduces her and she asks for the apple and he throws one. The moment he throws the apple to her, it disappears back to hell. And now the moment Eve is eating, Adam enters there and Adam tells her, why suffer the sin alone? So let me also accompany you in this sin. And God is so much furious with this action of Adam and Eve that he curses that you should be full of knowledge and then the generation or whatever you multiply will not be that pious, will suffer all the sufferings. What kind of sufferings? The woman have to suffer the childbirth and all of physical labor will be too tiresome for her. And what should the man do? He has to work day and night and earn a living for his woman and the children that come out of them. So this is how man cursed. This story that was there in the Yohurst account affected Milton so much that he thought maybe because of that original sin that I, being the child of Adam and Eve, should suffer. So at that moment he immediately felt that he is not the child of God. If he were the child of God, this would not be the kind of punishment he would suffer. Then he is the child of Satan. So he should naturally be on the side of Satan. His mind was corrupted somewhere in the middle of the poem. In the beginning he praised God, but in the middle of the poem his mind is corrupted. He says, why not follow Satan then? He becomes a rebel to God in the poem on his blindness. You have taken away the light. This is how the poem begins. You have taken away the only light that I had in my life. And there is a beautiful poem, a song in English. Give me oil in my lamp, keep me burning, burning, burning. So now even if you pour oil, how could there be any light? Because even if it is a day and my eyesight having gone, it's equal to darkness for me. And you expect labor out of me when my eyes have gone. There is light, but there is darkness inside, darkness physically and darkness mentally. How do you think I would give back your labor to you? I thought all these days that since you have given me this talent, my service to you should be in the form of literature, in the form of poetry, in the form of whatever art that is there in me. And now you have taken it back and I am sorry I cannot render my service to you anymore. And then what do you expect of me? You have taken my eyesight when I am in the middle age. I can neither live, I can neither die. And the remaining years, you expect me to depend on someone else. And I always thought that I should be dependent on you, and you got rid of your responsibility this way. And this is how there is a kind of a quarrel, a kind of a, you can't call it a quarrel, but the pain that he's suffering, he is rendering it to the feet of God. And then as the poem progresses like this, he tells now, will I ever get it back? Can I do something to give it back to you? So I have to wait and watch. So what does that wait and watch signify? That man has to have patience because God will do what he wants. So God might change the situation also some other day. Now I do not know whether this is the end of my talent or end of my service to you. Let me wait till the other day comes. But this dependence on someone during this blindness is going to be quite painful to me. So it so happens that in the literary career of Milton, he depends on his little girl, his daughter, and then the Paradise Lost was told to her and she written it. I don't know how original his thoughts are in Paradise Lost because it is written by someone else. He is narrating and she is writing. So now the service of Milton was a kind of a corrupted kind of a service as the Paradise Lost came, but then he rectified his mistake and he wrote Paradise Regained. But what exactly happens in Paradise Lost is he is almost on the side of Satan. And the moment you read Paradise Lost, unknowingly, somehow you are on the party of Satan. You have such beautiful things to remember there, like it's better to serve in, it's better to rule in hell than to serve in heaven. So the rebellious nature of Milton found in the next literary products that he produced was simply against the stand of God. But then, being in a religious era, being an ardent follower of Oliver Cromwell, somehow he could withhold all this. He could have continued writing, but something else took place in the life of Milton. He lost his wife, he lost his 2 children, and he himself became mentally crippled. And this was how we see the sad ending of Milton. But even now, as readers, we read, we do not know whether we should stand by Milton or whether we should stand by God, because God says, do karma and don't wait for the result. Even in on his blindness, God says the same. This is what is in the God's voice. Milton tells us, whatever I give you, enjoy that. Don't think of bad or good. And the obedience that you have from you towards me is itself a service of me. And Milton says, God is so rich and he has so many disciples, devotees like me, that why should he ever wait for my service? So God is all powerful, omniscient, omnipresent, omnipotent. So this is the kind of message that we get in this beautiful poem. So hope students you enjoyed and you had a nice journey into Eden Garden and the kind of argument between the poet and God. So this is a beautiful sonnet written in the Petrarchan style. Thank you.